Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox and welcome to Politically Non-Binary. I'm sorry I haven't put out as much content over this year, but it's for kind of a bittersweet reason. It's that a lot of the pressing concerns that I felt when I started this channel during the Trump presidency, the things that I felt like a lot of people weren't getting out there and talking about, I feel like the generation that has come up in that world and since that world and the radicalization that type of like blatant demi-fascism in office really brought out of us, created a space where some of the previous takes that I would regularly do aren't as necessary. I mean, you already get that on TikTok. Well, I guess you did. But I want to take it back to basics. And there was, I used to like to watch a lot of philosophy tube and that type of thing to help inspire me for this channel. And there was a moment that activated a thought in my head, an idea that I've been mulling over for years, a video that I've almost written for this channel and multiple times over my career. And I think that there's a very different way to look at it that this helps me take. And also it shows me the other side of the puzzle, because I think there's a certain dualism here.
Yeah, we belong to us. We decide what we do.
Well, if God does exist, it seems you've got notes.
Let's start Abigail's video at 4707. There's a trend in her videos that has existed for longer than this channel, where in her longer and more dramatic, she'll take kind of the core, the ideological core of a video and place it very late, but instead go almost all the way up to explaining it or talking around it in a way that emphasizes its existence without showing it.
Judith Butler says you can just choose to be any gender you want. Why, men can choose to be women, and women can choose to be baboons, and I can choose to be an attack helicopter. Ha ha, how silly. But when I actually read their work, I realized that's not what they're saying at all. Our very concept of ourselves as gendered subjects requires a social world. We depend on others for the recognition we need to become gendered subjects. We can still make some choices, wear whatever clothes or makeup you like, but the meaning of those things is not within our sole control. People have been making jokes like that about Butler for decades, even though they addressed this misunderstanding in their first paper in the first paragraph. Almost like the people mocking them aren't really listening. Even though this is a matter of settled law, some people still insist that a strict definition is required. Almost like those people aren't listening. But anyway,
so that when you finally get to the point later on in the video where
phantasm is a technical philosophy term for a particular way of misinterpreting the world by projecting your feelings onto it.
It's like, oh, you have this moment of realization, of epiphany. I really like that writing style. I think she does it incredibly well. And this is the aha moment, the revelation of the phantasm.
That's all very interesting, but it doesn't explain why the anti-gender movement just doesn't listen. Remember back at the start when we learned about the school board who turned down $10,000 of free money? Remember how the same misunderstandings of Butler's work have circulated for decades? Remember the insistence that the law must have a strict definition of women, even though we know that's not true? Remember all those unevidenced conspiracies about the trans deep state and secret UN plots? There's something else, too, that's very interesting. The language that the anti-gender movement uses is very action-y, threat, infiltration, danger, bullying, silencing, censorship, a comparison to nuclear weapons. It's not just that they're not listening. When they're invited to listen, it seems like that makes them feel as if they're under attack. And Butler has an explanation for this. They say that these people are caught in a phantasm.
So that reminded me that I've been wanting to do a video about the concept of projection, taking your own kind of flaws or insecurities or your own thoughts and projecting them onto other people, especially people that you dislike. I feel this happens a lot within politics especially, but I feel like this is especially strong within like the conservative media sphere, to where people simultaneously hold beliefs that the age of consent should be lowered so that they can have sex with 16-year-old children, while also thinking that there are massive pedophile conspiracies that are being instituted by the Democratic elites. They're kind of projecting those desires to have sex with children on their opponents. And there are a lot of less dramatic and more subtle ways that this happens, but there's a really good video. I probably can't actually show this. Maybe I can show it with subtitles. Also, the host of this also kind of got canceled for similar reasons. So on an even deeper level, even he is projecting in the same way that he's actually calling this man out for in this scene, which is just like fucking Inception level projection. Phantasm is different though. Phantasm would be a projection is a way of subtracting traits from yourself to add to someone else, to put somewhere else. This is not coming from inside of me. The world is like this, and because the world is like this, I have to be like this, right? It's like, I'm not sick. It's the world that's messed up because the world made me feel this way. And maybe that's true, but it is your reaction to the world. It is not an external phenomena. It's an internal phenomenon. Your feelings are inside of you. They are not inside of the world around you. Now, there are ways that the world shapes us and can trigger us and all of these sorts of things. And there is a certain validity to this sometimes. But projection does this for the same reason that phantasm does, and that's comfort. Often when there's something that someone can't reckon with about themselves or their own desires or their own feelings, they project it onto others to say that they aren't bad, that everyone's bad, that while also not admitting that they themselves have these feelings in many cases. So actually they even end up portraying themselves to be holier than thou and ultimately coming for a reckoning when people realize that they're doing the thing that they accused everyone else of to begin with. A phantasm is kind of another way of doing this, another way of achieving the same psychological comfort. But in this way, I can't describe it, but it feels like an opposite or an even complementary effect for me. So starting back at 4821.
Philosopher Michael Nass says that it's a prism that refracts an as-if into an as-so. For example, the presence of a trans person with a penis in a public bathroom makes me feel as if I am under attack becomes I am under attack.
The thing I want to ask though, and this will get explained but not directly, is like, without drawing too much armchair psychologizing into this general scenario, why is it that one feels under attack when a woman with a penis is around them, or a man with a vagina is around them? Why would they feel under attack? Is it because, and this is what a phantasm would suggest, there is something underlying about themselves that they refuse to acknowledge? And again, instead of accepting that this is inside of them, they try to place the blame on, I don't know, their sexual excitement at the idea of, you know, we all like things that are different. We're thrill seekers. It's kind of hard-coded into us. Maybe you're not gay, but you're curious. You know, everybody wants to experiment, I think, a little bit. And that feeling, that instinct can be threatening to certain hyper-masculine or hyper-heteronormative mind states. It's hard for people to accept that we're all a little bit fluid and ambiguous, or we at least are curious. Even if it's something that we definitely wouldn't enjoy, I don't know, maybe I would though, is a thought that's easy to creep into your head. That's in your head though, mate. That's not, the trans person didn't do that to you. If anything, you do this to the trans person by sexualizing their body and exoticizing it as well, to the point where it becomes and I, you know, speaking of trans women, for like a lot of straight, especially closeted men, it can be fetishized like very rapidly and dangerously from certain people. When those people are inside of a phantasm simultaneously fetishizing it, this can create kind of a dangerous cognitive dissonance, which has gotten many a trans woman killed over the years when it snaps. When they begin to use the phantasm to blame this person for their personal desires, deciding that the only way to remove those desires from themselves is to remove the object of their desire from life. It's dark, but like really this feels like the philosophical core of why things like that happen in relationships that could have been open and loving and pure, maybe in a different world. But phantasms are a bigger problem than just this, and while Abby here is addressing it in relation to gender and the anti-gender movement, there are a lot of movements that use these phantasms. There are a lot of political campaigns, PR campaigns, as well as media campaigns that deliberately create these phantasms, and we accept them not even because we believe them, but because they give us comfort. Even disbelieving them. There's a certain 1984 style doublethink here where we can even hold a disbelieving thought, but because it brings us comfort, we don't question it. And that worldview, that mind state is inherently fragile. That anyone who asks you to question that is a threat to your comfort. They are removing your comfort from you because you are inherently mentally unstable in this way. And therefore, this mental instability causes you to feel as though you are under attack because they are removing your comfort, because your comfort was an illusion. It was an illusion because you had not processed the cognitive dissonance that was required to hold those two contradictory thoughts and feel comfortable with them. But Abby will give us more detail on these phantasms, starting again at 48-44.
People use phantasms to avoid cognitive dissonance in the face of anxiety. For example, literature professor Darren Tenev says we use them to help us confront death. Normally, we don't want to think about our own deaths. It makes us anxious. So when we picture our own funerals and what we would want to happen to our remains, we imagine ourselves as being gone, but also kind of still around. Like, oh, I'd love to be buried somewhere that has a nice view. Well, why? You're not going to be there to enjoy it. By definition, that's a contradictory dream. But the phantasm contains that contradiction and soothes our anxiety. It is as if I will still be there. I will still be there. There's no logic to this. It's an exercise in trying to not make sense because you can't handle the conclusions that you would reach if you did. That's why people caught in a phantasm will throw out all kinds of claims that it doesn't really seem like they've thought through or have any evidence for, and when questioned on it, they'll say, "You're attacking me," because they're trying really hard to not think something. But what exactly? What is the thing that the anti-gender movement doesn't want to think? Well, it'll probably be different for different individuals. Why our phantasms catching on. And not just about this topic, but all sorts of things. On the previous episode, we talked about 15-minute city conspiracy theories, and there's QAnon and conspiracies about the royal family. Sometimes the way that Zionists talk about Palestinians has a touch of the phantasm about it, as some Jewish scholars have noted. This is a really big issue, and it would be great if we could sort the whole gender thing out, because we've got a lot of real problems to deal with. We don't have time to be fighting imaginary ones.
The problem with us constantly being distracted by these phantasms is that this is just really a powerful way to lock our minds away from thinking about the issues that we need to be thinking about to move forward societally. This can be used by public relations on either in favor of politicians or corporations. This can be used. I mean, there's so many ways that this can happen to us. And because the core of the phantasm is not thinking something, it takes on some of those doublethink qualities I was talking about before. And if those who control the message, those who control the conversation, are able to incorporate enough of these phantasms that keep us away from our rightful concern in all of these issues that we should be dealing with, while we are, locked away fighting invisible wars. Like, what they say about people who play too many video games, people who spend too much time playing Call of Duty, for instance. They're out there fighting a war that does not exist, but they are wasting their lives in doing so, and therefore removing themselves from this greater societal world while essentially becoming like a little worker drone. There are people who describe video games that way. This is a very, I think, Chinese way of looking at it as well, as they consider video games to be a certain type of opiate of the masses, which is something the Chinese people do not say lightly given their history. But at the same time, these political diversions, meme wars, and just social divide of culture war, it is not only preventing us from thinking about these things, but because it is the primary way that our politicians market themselves to us, they can only act and think within the phantasm themselves, because a break from that could break their constituents out of that same phantasm, and that would leave them very angry with them. And angry voters do not often re-elect those that they are angry at. So it becomes politically bad to break these people out of their phantasms for the politicians that use them to get these solid constituencies that are voting on imaginary issues, causes and problems and solutions that don't exist and don't fix anything, so that no one is focused on the larger issues. Now, this happens across the board, and Abby also notes this later on in the video, that there are a lot of people on the right who I would agree with on a lot of the major issues in the core aspect, but they don't have the language to really talk about it in the same way that leftists do, so it's hard to bridge that communicational gap.
Anti-genderism conflates gender with those aspects of capitalism that are most frustrating to members of the working and lower middle class, especially to parents and would-be parents: precarity and the crisis of care resulting from unequal distribution of wealth. Instead of naming the problem in economic terms as injustice and exploitation, anti-genderism presents the world of capitalism's winners as degenerate and morally corrupt.
But we both hate the way that capitalism has hollowed out so many things that are important to both the left, but also to we have stripped away so much of what has made us human for consumerism, neoliberalism, shopping malls, parking lots, and endless streaming cycles that for a conservative, there's very little left of a traditional lifestyle. Like, there are intersections in the ways that both of us look at the world as being bad. We just blame it on different things, where the right is a lot more likely to be mad at Hollywood or whatever. We are addressing issues of capitalism. And then there are also people, there are phantasms across the board. There's absolutely so many centrist phantasms. I mean, and likewise, there's so many on the right, and I think there's a lot of people on the right. And the reason that I consider this channel to be politically non-binary is because I believe there's a lot of people on the right who don't buy into these phantasms. They don't necessarily have the language to articulate their feelings in a way that would line them up with me easily, but in the same way, they acknowledge some of the same problems, and because they didn't buy in to the mainstream, they are able to do something different.
There really are a lot of problems in the world, and a lot of them are systemic. A lot of women really are devalued. A lot of children really are living in an increasingly dangerous and warming world. A lot of people really do rely on their families to protect them from big institutions and economic forces that really will trample every tradition and really do dissolve everything into money. Graf and Kolschuk say we need to appreciate the fact that right-wing populism is criticizing capitalism, albeit in phantasmic terms. They say we should move beyond the old idea that the left are anti-capitalist and the right are always pro-market. Now, some of them are, to be sure, but not all. They say that these days a lot of people on the right are actually criticizing capitalism, even if they don't use that kind of language.
If they are truly just concerned with preserving kind of human tradition in the face of just every tech company wanting to disrupt literally everything, including the ways that we relate to ourselves and relate to each other, societally, live, etc. Conservatives don't want all of these things redefined, or at least don't want them redefined so fast, and there's a good instinct there. There's a video there they've been wanting to do for a long time about, like, positive conservatism and how conservatism isn't what it is in American politics, because it can be this more neutral thing, but it's been so weaponized. And, like, I remember my father saying that there are no real conservatives anymore. He started saying that in like 2004. And he's right, because what people of his generation knew as conservatives don't exist. That is another tradition that has been wiped out, and it is also the tradition that would have kept more of these other traditions from being wiped out as well. So there is actually a positive case to be made for conservatism, and I'll have to do that later, as I do not have time in this video to. But there are also phantasms that exist on the far right, on the far left, as well. Yeah, certainly on the far right as well. They're all over the place. These are the comfortable white lies. We feel like they're white lies that we tell ourselves to make ourselves feel good at night. Often they're just reductivism, a reduction of the real life complexity of the world. But at the same time, I think there is the potential for a relatively simple answer to a lot of our ails in the face of capitalism that everyone should be able to agree on. And yet there are several phantasms both on the left and right that get in the way of this, because of how the corporate seeking profit motive, how it's hard-coded into law. If that potentially were changed, we would see something that would cease to be capitalism as we know it, but would also not be ideal. It would not be the end point. It would not be the only thing that we would have to do. And there was a lot of leftists who, even farther left, would agree with this point. But I think a lot of people replace that goal, that as being a primary goal, with an ideal, with a utopian vision, with a insistence that it has to be done a certain way. And because of this, they trade the utopia in their mind for the good and the possible. which is often kind of a centrist catchphrase, and there's also a phantasm there to be sure, but I think because of how corporations have so much outsized power, especially here in America and across the world, like a lot of the darkest things that the American government has ever done has been at the behest of corporations and defending corporate interests. I think, and especially within the 20th century. So if we were to rewrite this one change, I think that the future would be so different that certain ideologies might, fall apart. I mean, most ideologies would, because it would just be a different paradigm. Such a simple but fundamental change that everything would be different. And we might be a lot closer to that utopia than we realize. And how we get there is more of a question to be asked at that point. It's good to theorize how you would move on from there, but we have limitations in our thinking. We imagine the world through the prism of what is now. So it could be hard to imagine just what would become possible and how easily it could be possible. How little we might have to fight in the right situations if only that singular legal requirement to pursue the profit motive was removed from corporations. Now, this would certainly still allow social divide, injustice, and a class system to persist, but it would go so far and even the playing field for everyone that we might actually be able to come together and agree over the next decades following on a more egalitarian system, as we, I think, might be able to technologically progress into more of a resource-based society than an economic society, one where we have what we have and it is shared among us, a truly anti-capitalist world. Or maybe it is that is my ideal that keeps me from seeing other, even more incremental ways that people would put this into motion. By saying that has to be first, I miss all the steps that I could be taking on the way there. In a way, our perception is always limiting like this, but it is important to examine our presuppositions, and especially when we feel that thinking about something makes us feel uncomfortable or uneasy, this is perhaps because it is a realization that ought to come, that something about the way that we see the world is unreasonable at the very least, that doesn't seem to comport with reality. We need to accept that evidence. We need to accept the truth. We need to actually, unironically, put facts over feelings. Because in a feelings-based world, we're easily controlled by our phantasms. And of course, these phantasms are just another way of referring to kind of the mental programming that I was talking about in previous videos like Meme Wars and my more recent video on artificial intelligence, psyops, and the alphabet boys. So if you're into that kind of thing, check those videos out. I also write content. My most recent series is basically following data privacy activists. Kind of the first book is about the radicalization, how they got into the fight, and the following trilogy will eventually put them on the national stage to stick up for the little guy. And I think it's going to be a really fun David versus Goliath trilogy. And if you want to check that out, there's a link in the description to my books and to other places I post content online, as well as places that you can support this channel as well. Especially if a couple of you actually start donating to the channel through that link, as there's not really much of anything coming in, and I think it's for one of my other channels anyways, then I'll definitely try to be posting a lot more often than I have lately. I definitely still want to talk about the concept of a positive conservatism and how this especially could be beneficial against climate change. Because if you think about it, trying to prevent global climate change is about the most conservative thing you can do, because our most important shared resource is the world, and conserving that is very important. But also, a video about immigration as well. There's I have some feels on interstate immigration within the United States, and the way that it feels like northern immigrants from the north are moving into the relatively poor and low property value south in order to, not in order to, because I think that they're acting on economic pressures. Housing prices are going up everywhere, and especially in the north, from a lot of the people that have kind of fit this profile that I've personally met and talked to, taxes are going up as well. Property taxes are going up as well. And as their property value goes up and the property taxes go up, there's a feedback loop that really drives the just annual price of keeping their home there up. So they sell their house and they move here, and they don't intend to do this, but as enough of them move over time, there is a gentrifying effect. As they kind of move that money in with them, this in turn recreates the effect that they were seeking to flee, but twofold for the Southerner. So it's and if this was the U.S. talking about, if this was like talking about the U.S. and any other country and that type of immigration, this would be a very right-wing position. But I feel like with interstate immigration, it's a little bit different. Like, there's a different consideration potentially to be made, because essentially what we are talking about here is gentrification. There is a very big difference between international immigration to the United States and interstate immigration. It's very different, and it seems to kind of prioritize this. And we've, if you want a good recent example of this, Texas is essentially or certain portions of Texas at least, is a big place. There's plenty of desolate regions to shovel the poor off to. Is essentially being colonized by people from California, who were a little bit too pro-market and anti-taxes to want to remain in California as a part of the liberal dream. Okay, well, all that being said, thank you so much for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, even if you don't want to buy a book or donate to the channel or even check out another video. Be sure to like it, because, hey, you got this far, so that must mean something. But I would seriously recommend subscribing. I don't post often at the moment. Maybe I will in the future. So, hey, it's not really that big of an ask. Maybe you'll see another one of my videos in a couple of months, and I'll see you in the next one.